they vanished into the stars. The daughters of a queen feared across galaxies, gone, as if the void itself had swallowed them whole. Armies scoured the black. Fleets tore through nebulae. Worlds trembled under her fury. Yet there was no trace. Only silence. Only whispers. And then, a discovery so small, so fragile, it should have been impossible. A lone human soldier, battered and unknown, was found in the ruins of war. Upon his chest, curled like children long lost to nightmares, lay the missing heirs of the alien throne. Why humanity? Why this species of fragile flesh and fleeting breath? To the queen it was an insult. To the galaxy a mystery. But to the soldier, humanity's soldier, it was something else entirely. Because in the vastness of the void, where empires fall and stars burn out, humanity has always been the spark that refuses to die. Fragile, yes. Insignificant, perhaps. But when pressed against extinction's edge, humanity does what no empire, no queen, no galaxy expects. It endures. It protects. It defies. So the question remains, if this is what humanity does when cornered, what will it become when the galaxy finally takes notice? The settlement was not much to look at, just a scattering of domes and steel, towers clinging to the edge of a barren world. To the galaxy's empires, it was nothing more than dust on the wind. To the people who called it home, it was everything. Here on this fragile outpost, humanity lived as it always had, by working, by dreaming, by refusing to give up. Farmers tended rows of hydroponic grain that glowed green beneath glass roofs. Children chased each other through narrow corridors, laughter echoing like birdsong in the sterile air. Engineers argued over power cells and stubborn machines, while old veterans gathered in the mess hall to tell stories no one else believed. And among them was Sergeant Daniel Hale, a soldier who had traded battlefields for rebuilding. His hands bore the scars of war, yet he now used them to repair irrigation pumps and carry crates for neighbors. To him, this place was not just survival, it was hope. Humanity's chance to begin again, away from the wars of greater powers. But in the silence between shores, Daniel often felt it, that weight pressing from the stars above. He would pause, gaze at the endless black sky, and know they were not alone. Humanity never was. Stories drifted through the settlement like rumors carried on the wind. Of fleets vanishing in distant sectors, of a queen whose wrath could burn worlds. The children laughed at such tales, calling them ghost stories. The veterans did not laugh. They had seen enough to know that when whispers turned into fear, danger was never far behind. Life continued fragile as glass. Families planted seeds and spoke of harvests. Couples planned futures they barely believed in. And Daniel, though haunted by memories, allowed himself to dream of peace. Yet peace was always a fragile illusion. It began with small signs, the sudden silence of a listening post, a missed transmission from a neighboring colony. Traders spoke of unusual patrols, of alien ships drifting at the edge of human space. No one wanted to believe it, not here, not after so many years of running. But belief mattered little when the shadows of empires stirred. On the night the settlement's power flickered, Daniel stood outside beneath the false stars of the dome. He watched the lights stutter, heard the hum of the generators falter, and for just a moment, felt the same dread he once knew in the trenches. Above him, the sky remained deceptively calm, a sea of quiet starlight. But he could not shake the feeling that something vast and merciless was already moving toward them, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, an alien queen searched not just for vengeance, but for something far more precious. Her daughters were gone, and though the settlers could not yet know it, their quiet world was about to become the center of her fury. They came like shadows unrolling across the stars. Not a roar, not a trumpet, a cold, organized silence. Ranks of ships sliding into position, black petals folding open to reveal teeth. Whole sectors blinked out. Outposts that had stood for decades went mute in a single breath. The Queen's armada moved with a cruelty that felt inevitable. Fear spread first as rumor, then as flame. Whisper. The sky was not safe anymore. Pause. Daniel watched the horizon light up and felt the old dread gather in his chest. He had seen ships fall before. He had patched men who smelled of ozone and burnt metal. But those memories are different from watching your home turn into a target. The hydroponic farms went quiet. The children stopped laughing. The veterans readied their old rifles. Nobody pretended they could win a war of empires. Not here, not like this. The first strikes were surgical, sensors, relay towers, anything that could call for help. Then the hunting swarms followed. little craft that slipped between debris and struck homes like insects with knives. They moved in numbers that made counting pointless. For every turret the settlers erected, 3 more ships arrived. For every barricade, a new breach. Humanity lost ground. Humanity lost names. Corpses were catalogued in the cold light of dawn. The void took what it wanted and left grief as evidence. Yet humanity did not kneel. They improvised. They scavenged. They made traps from rust and hope. Engineers turned greenhouse glass into armor. School teachers taught children how to move silently and where to hide. Daniel formed a ragged militia. Old vets, farmers with pitchforks, a medic who had never fired a weapon in her life. They held a line at the cratered ridge, not because it mattered tactically, but because someone had to stand where the ground met the sky and say, "We were here." Anger followed fear like a second tide. It began small and hot in a smashed drone, an exploding supply pod, and built until it was a roar. People who had once traded stories in the mess hall now hurled themselves against hulls of alien boats, letting fury carry them farther than reason. Defiance became prayer. In the ruin of a bus depot, a mother picked up a scavenged flare and swallowed her terror until the flare became a command. "Hold," she said, "for our children." The Queen did not merely send weapons. She sent hunters, lithe, pale things that moved between ruins like predators in a graveyard. They sought out life with a precision that made every hiding place suspect. They were not indifferent. They were punitive. When they found shelter, they took it apart limb by limb. When they found a human with a sleeping child in his arms, they measured the man with an alien calculus and decided. The settlement learned quickly the shape of their new enemy. Efficient, remorseless, convinced of its own right. And then the rumor that had been whispered at the edges, the rumor that had sounded like a ghost story told to children, became a name on everyone's lips. The Queen, her voice, transmitted in shards of warning and static, came once, like thunder through a cracked sky. She accused. She demanded. She promised vengeance. She called the missing daughters stolen. She named the settlement as the locus of the theft. Her words were not merely loud. They were a decree. The armada pivoted. The hunters multiplied. But among the smoke and the counting of losses, a different truth lived, small and stubborn. Those daughters were not weapons. They were children who had curled up trusting a human's heartbeat. Someone in the ruins had wrapped them in a blanket. Someone had failed to be indifferent. That someone was a person who thought first of small hands and soft breathing and not of the politics of empires. That someone was, by accident and by mercy, the reason the Queen's fury sharpened and turned. The settlers argued in the dim light of the medical tent. Should they return the girls and beg for mercy, a mercy they had no reason to trust? Should they hide and pray? Daniel argued for concealment until a better plan could be formed. Others argued for surrender, imagining that a bow and a confession might buy lives. The debate carved the night into 2 camps, those who would give up children for safety, and those who believed that handing over the small and the helpless would be the final surrender of what made them human. Then the first raid of capture came. It was swift. It was brutal. Hunters slipped into the outer ring and took a handful of refugees, dragging them skyward with cords that burned flesh. People watched through slits, helpless, as friends were lifted and removed into the cold. The sound of a child's cry became a fuse lighting the settlement's dormant fury. Men and women who had guarded granaries for decades now picked up guns and axes, with the practiced skill of necessity. They ran into the night because standing by had become unbearable. Loss turned to resolve. Resolve to defiance. They began to fight with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. Ambushes were laid in tunnels no one suspected. Mines were rooted into the soil where patrols stepped. The hunters learned to expect human cunning in places where they had expected only fear. Small victories stacked up. A skiff downed, a patrol intercepted, a child snatched from the teeth of an alien and pulled back into human arms. Each victory was paid for. Each victory burned with grief. The settlement stitched courage and sorrow together like bandages. The people who remained grew harder. Their voices found new tones, not only prayer and pleading, but a rising pitch of command. "We are not your quarry," they shouted once into the sky. "We are not a story you can erase." Rising. The Queen noticed. Her tactics adjusted. Her ships came closer. Her hunters became more relentless. But every time they took, humanity found a way to push back, a flare in the dark, A jury-rigged EMP that sent a skiff tumbling. A single human hand reaching into the cold to drag a companion back to life. The settlers were falling, yes. They were losing homes and names and the neat quiet of everyday things. But they were not kneeling. They were impossibly fighting in new ways that the Armada had not predicted. And beneath it all, a question like a pulse hammered in Daniel's bones. What did it mean that the Queen's daughters had trusted a human? Why had they fled to flesh instead of fleet? What truth did that tiny, impossible gesture hide? The answer felt like a key, a single thought that could unlock either salvation or greater ruin. He would not know the answer by daylight. He would not know it in mortar and flame. The true test, he realized, would come when the Queen chose to settle her score in person. Until then, every night would be a cliff edge, every morning a risk. And in the dark between one raid and the next, the settlement learned to make noise for the sake of hope. What would the galaxy say when a human stood and refused to bow? What would happen when defiance stopped being small and became contagious? Pause. Tell me, what would you do if your child were at the center of an empire's wrath? Drop your answer below. I'll read everyone. The sky was burning. The Queen had come herself. Her warship blotted out the stars, a leviathan of black metal and cruel light, its silhouette cutting across the heavens like a scar. Every cannon on its hull glowed with restrained fire, waiting for her command. This was not a raid. This was judgment. Her voice thundered through the comms, layered with static and venom. Return what you have stolen, humans. Return my blood, or I will erase you, and every echo of you, from this soil. The settlers stood in silence. Some trembled, some wept. A few dropped to their knees, praying to gods they had abandoned long ago. And in the middle of it all, Daniel Hale stepped forward, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Two small faces peeked from the folds, eyes wide and innocent, untouched by the hatred hanging in the air. The children reached for him, not for the voice in the sky. For him, for humanity, and something inside him. Something he had buried beneath years of war and grief, hardened into resolve. He spoke not with weapons, but with his voice, ragged yet unyielding. We didn't steal them. They found us. They trusted us, and we will not give them back to your wrath. Gasps spread through the settlers. It was madness, speaking defiance to a queen who commanded the stars. But madness was all they had left. The Queen's fury descended. Her hunters poured into the settlement like locusts, and pale blades flashing in the smoke. Buildings collapsed beneath bombardments. Fire consumed the hydroponics, the water towers, the fragile domes. Every breath tasted of ash. Humanity staggered but did not fall. They fought with everything. Rifles that jammed, explosives fashioned from broken engines, even sharpened tools gripped by desperate hands. Farmers stood beside soldiers. Children ferried water to the wounded. Old veterans laughed through bloodied teeth, pulling triggers until their weapons clicked empty. Humanity's line bent and cracked, but it did not break. In the chaos, Daniel made a choice. He handed the children to the medic, whispering, "Hide them. No matter what. They must live." Then he turned back toward the storm, rifle slung, jaw set. The Queen herself descended, a towering figure wrapped in armor that gleamed like obsidian. Her presence crushed the air, her eyes burning with imperial wrath. She walked through the flames as if they bowed before her. Hunters flanked her, but none dared step closer than she allowed. Daniel faced her alone, a single soldier against a monarch of galaxies. His heart pounded like a war drum, but his voice did not waver. "You want them? You'll have to go through me, and through every human here. We may die, but you'll never own them again." The Queen raised a hand, claws gleaming with energy. For an instant, silence fell. Then the world erupted. Her strike leveled the ridge where Daniel stood, a wall of force that sent stone and flame skyward. But Daniel had already moved, throwing himself into the heart of the blast with a makeshift EMP charge strapped to his chest. The explosion cracked the sky open. Her hunters fell screaming, their systems fried. The Queen staggered, armor shattering, her roar of fury rolling across the battlefield. Daniel's body was gone in the light, but his act ignited something far greater than his own survival. The settlers, the fragile, broken remnants of humanity on this barren world, saw his defiance and answered it with their own. They surged forward, not as individuals, but as one. Farmers became warriors. Engineers became saboteurs. Children who once feared shadows now shouted battle cries. Every human heart blazed with the same fire, the refusal to kneel. The Queen fought with fury unmatched, her claws slicing, her power shattering walls. But for every human she struck down, two more rose. They swarmed her hunters, pulling them down with bare hands, knives, and teeth. They tore weapons from alien grips, turning them back against their masters. Humanity's defiance spread like a contagion, impossible to kill. And in the midst of the storm, the queen saw it. Her daughters, shielded, hidden by trembling arms, watching the humans fight not for conquest, but for them. She saw the way their small hands reached for those who bled to protect them. She saw trust reflected in their eyes, and for a heartbeat, something flickered in her resolve. Doubt. The settlers did not see her hesitation. They only knew the battle had reached its breaking point. The queen's forces faltered, their ranks collapsing under the weight of resistance. But victory was not yet theirs. Daniel's final act had crippled her armor, but not destroyed her. She rose once more, towering over the flames, her voice a scream of grief and rage. You will pay for this defiance. You will burn for daring to keep what is mine. And yet, even as her words scorched the air, her daughters turned away from her. They clung to the medic's neck, their small faces buried against human shoulders, their trust unwavering. The queen's scream tore the night in two. She struck again, shattering the earth beneath her. Settlers fell, walls collapsed, fire consumed all that remained. Humanity stood at the very edge of annihilation. But still they did not bow. And in that moment, in the fire, in the blood, in the roar of a mother who had lost and a people who refused to yield, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The climax did not end with victory, nor with surrender. It ended with an image carved into memory, a burning settlement, a queen, bloodied but unbroken, a people battered but still standing, and two alien children, safe in the arms of humanity, as the galaxy's most powerful empire trembled on the edge of change. The fires smoldered for days. What had once been a fragile settlement, greenhouses, laughter, quiet corridors, was now ash and ruin. The air carried the acrid scent of smoke and steel, and every survivor wore grief in their eyes. Rows of makeshift graves lined the crater ridge, marked with simple stones or scratched names. Humanity had endured, but at a price that could never be counted in numbers alone. Daniel Hale's name was spoken first among the fallen. The soldier who had once sought peace had given his life in defiance, and in doing so had become a symbol. Children who once clung to their parents' hands now whispered his story as though it were legend. The medic who held the alien heirs carved his name onto a piece of metal and placed it where the dome once stood. For Daniel, she said. For all of us. The queen had withdrawn, her forces shattered but not destroyed. No declaration of peace was given, no treaty signed. She had left not in defeat, but in silence, and silence from an empire that vast was louder than war drums. Yet those who survived understood what her hesitation meant. In her daughter's eyes, in their unbroken trust for the humans who had protected them, she had seen something that even she could not command. And so the galaxy shifted. Whispers carried through the void, that a small band of humans had faced the fury of an empire and lived, that they had protected the blood of a queen against her will, that they had not knelt even when the stars themselves turned against them. Such whispers grew in power, because empires are not built on truth alone, they are built on stories. And humanity's story was now one of defiance, sacrifice, and impossible courage. The survivors rebuilt with trembling hands, but every stone they lifted was heavier with meaning. They were no longer anonymous settlers clinging to survival. They were the keepers of a story the galaxy would never forget. Their children grew up not in the shadow of fear, but in the blaze of legacy. And the daughters, alien royalty bound by blood to the queen, walked among humans as children, not as symbols. They laughed, they cried, they learned. They carried no crowns, only memories of arms that had shielded them when the void closed in. What would come next, no one could say. The queen might return with greater fury. Other empires might descend, fearing what humanity's defiance represented. Or perhaps alliances would form in places no one had imagined. But whatever path unfolded, one truth had been carved into the marrow of history. Humanity was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed as fragile sparks flickering in the dark. They had stood, they had bled, and they had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten. That strength is not only in fleets or firepower. It is in courage, it is in sacrifice, it is in the choice to protect the helpless, even when it means defying the impossible. And as the stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to all that had been lost and won, a single question burned brighter than any fire, brighter than any grief. Whisper, rising firm voice. If this is what humanity does when cornered, what will they become when they finally rise?